that story, and all, I'm just giving you the bare skeleton. Everything that you know from 570 up until 661, you would assume comes from people that were actually living at that time, right? You would hope it was coming from people that actually lived, certainly in that century. You would have hoped so. But here's the problem. Everything that we know about this period of time does not get written down till this period of time. Let me just put it onto one graph so you know what I'm talking about. So everything we know about how Islam began, who Muhammad was, where he was born, all the revelations and all how the Quran was put together, does not get written at all during the 7th century, doesn't get written down during the 8th century. It starts to get written down with a man named Ibn Ishaq in 765. We don't have any of his material. We're dependent on this man, Ibn Hisham. So it's not till 833 that we get the first reference, the first biography of this man named Muhammad, or how Islam began. That's 200 years after the fact. Does that bother any of you? The first time we get any of his sayings, the hadith, are not written down till this part here, Al-Bukhari, 870. That's 240 years after the fact. Does that bother you? It should bother all of you. Because none of these people were living at this time. They never were in that same century. They weren't even in Arabia. They were living in what is today Iran and Iraq. Hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years distant. And then the tafsir and the tahriq, which come after that, which would be the commentaries, they don't get written down until Al-Tabari puts them down, and that's the 10th century. So what we know that's happening in the 7th century doesn't get written down till the 9th and the 10th century, 200 to 300 years later. Now, we know that Jesus, we know pretty much quite a bit about him. We know what he did, we know what he said, because they were written down almost immediately. Within 40 to 60 years of his death, we already have the 4 Gospels. That's the Sirah of Jesus. That would be the biography of Jesus, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's also the Hadith of Jesus, the sayings of Jesus, which would be the red letter part of the Gospels, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We would have the commentaries, which would be the letters of Paul, written within 15 to 30 years of Christ, and 20 years of Christ's death. And then you have the Tahriq, which would be the histories of the early church, the book of Acts, written between 52 and 62 AD, within 20 to 30 years of Christ's death. So everything we know about Jesus historically, we can pretty well know that the people that wrote it either were living at that time, knew him personally, like John and Matthew knew him personally, or got it from those who did know him, got it from the eyewitnesses. Can you see the difference? When you do a comparison, all that we know about the emergence of Christianity, who Jesus was, what he did and said, comes within 50 to 60 years after Christ's death. For that of Islam, all we know about who Muhammad was, how it began, what the Quran was, and all that, comes from 200 to 300 years. Now, why haven't we been told that?